I've done that before too, Craig. I mean, not for this stream tonight. That would be weird, but for other streams. Click on it and it doesn't start for 3 days, and then you go, wonder why someone else is here. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I hope you're having a beautiful day, beautiful week. It is very cold here. I shouldn't say very cold. For December, it's in the mid 30s right now. Cold enough. But I hope you're all having a wonderful week and doing well. As always, this is a time that you can ask whatever questions you'd like. No question is off limits. The only request we have of you is that you're kind, generous, and welcoming to other people in the chat. So with that, feel free to add any questions to the chat. As you can see here, questions should look like this, a Q colon, and then whatever your question is. It just helps me out a little bit while I'm going through the chat to try and find what is questions and what is just conversations happening. All right. So it is December. How many of you folks are like holiday people? Are you guys excited about Christmas? Are you dreading the holidays? How are you feeling about holidays? For me, I'm such a mixed bag. There's so many things I like about holidays. Seeing family that I don't necessarily get to see all that often. Having conversations with folks I don't get to chat with very much. People seeming to take a little bit more time in community and friendships and relationships. So that stuff's all great. But I also have some personal hangups, emotional hangups about the holidays. They tend to be a little bit more difficult for me to navigate emotionally with depression and anxiety. So what about you? How are you guys? How does this time? So I did this. I decided I was going to try and make it a little bit more festive around here. So I went with a Christmas motif, and instead of hot chocolate, I'm going to have a little bit of whiskey to warm me up. All right. I did not pull up the Wheel of Wonder or Wheel of Wisdom. I didn't have that up and ready to go. I probably should have done that. Let's see here. Anybody reading any interesting books? I just got a book today about Christian response to homelessness that I'm kind of interested to read and see what their perspective is. It is someone that we're hopefully going to see if they'd be interested in coming on a Thursday night and having a conversation around their book. Primarily, if you didn't know this, but Tana and I, and actually several of the people that usually are joining the stream, have all done work and done justice work, etc., amongst the unhoused here in Toledo. And so it's a conversations that is near and dear to my heart. So hopefully we'll be able to get this gentleman on. His name is Kevin Nye, I believe. Do you believe that there's a point where it becomes detrimental to not celebrate victories of your own charitability? All right, I'm got to process that. Do you believe that there's a point where it becomes detrimental to not celebrate victories of your own charitability? I think we should always, I don't know that there's a time that we shouldn't celebrate our own charity, unless by celebrating our charity we are um, doing it in a manner or for the purpose of making other people feel bad for not doing more. I think that's a fine balance. I don't think that the idea of charity is meant to be something that we do in order to um, guilt or shame other people into it. If someone feels guilt or shame because they see you do charity, that's one thing. It's another thing to kind of tell them about it. Um, but I think that um, it's always good to talk about the charity that we see others doing. It's not always as healthy to talk about the charity that we are doing. Does that make sense? Um, so I think it's good in a community or in a group to celebrate what others have done. I think it can get a little strange or at least awkward when we are celebrating what we've done, unless it's a moment where, like, we got outside the box. We did something that maybe we wouldn't normally do. And so it's outside of our character, it's outside of our normal behavior. And so we want to kind of celebrate that we took a chance and did something and then we had a positive experience. I think those things are definitely always worth celebrating. I don't know if that completely answers your question, Fifth Sunday, but feel free to add something else. Mine became rough after my family all went away, so I spent most of them alone, but I was able to be charitable and that excited me. Now it's even difficult to do that. Yeah, I understand. It can be difficult. Um, but I don't think aloneness or even being stuck somewhere eliminates our charitableness. It just changes it. It alters the way that it comes about. And we might just have to be more creative about the way we go about demonstrating charity, um, whether to our community or like our immediate community friendship group or our larger community, our city, etc. I'm sure that you could find ways to still be charitable Fifth Sunday. All right. Any other questions? If not, let me just see something here. All right. So we can go to the spinner. What must you do to be saved? Oh, man. That is a good one. Sorry. I having some complications here. All right. What must you do to be saved? Um, so this is such an interesting question. I'd love for chat to kind of add their 2 cents here as well. Um, what we have made salvation is, unfortunately, within evangelicalism particularly, is evangelicalism took this concept of salvation and made it about saying a prayer and saying it in a certain way and acknowledging certain beliefs in a certain order. And there's a lot of that's very incantation-esque, right? Um, and because of that, um, it misses the point, right? Salvation is something that is offered to people who are suffering. Salvation is something that's offered to people who um, need security, safety, welcoming, healing, love, compassion, which that's pretty much all of us, right? We all need that. And when we make salvation about saying a prayer or doing the right things in a certain order, we actually um, destroy the very beauty that exists within the concept of salvation. I'd recommend, and I don't know if Tana, if you can put a link in the chat, but we did a podcast on salvation, and I just highly recommend you check out that podcast. We go way in depth around those things. So if if you'd be willing to do that, that'd be great. Yeah, walk the Romans road to pray the sinner's prayer and then being perfect from that moment. Yeah, it's really a sad state of affairs. Instead of it being something beautiful, where we um, where we can uh, experience growth and experience an expression of faith. Instead, it becomes like this kind of tightrope act that is really unhealthy. Uh, or it's about being of the right denomination. I was trolled by a Catholic today who told me I am going to hell because I don't believe the right religion. Hmm. Well, I hate to break it to the Catholic, but Catholics are Christian. And Tana, if I'm not mistaken, you are a Christian. And so it seems to me that you're of the same exact religion, just of a different sect of that religion. We should avoid making the people we are charitable to props for photos we then share on social media. Yeah, that's a huge thing. That drives me nuts. And I see Amanda as well this Sunday joining it. Yeah, when we are doing charitable acts and we are attempting to get credit for it, this is that Matthew 6 section, right? Where Jesus says, if you do these things on the corner where everyone can see you and applaud you, then that's your reward. Because the idea is that we live in such a way that we are rewarded with treasures in heaven, as you've often heard. And when we do things to draw attention to celebrate the charitable acts we did, it doesn't undo the charitable act. It's still a charitable act. But what it does is your reward is being patted on the back and told, wow, you're a swell person for doing that. And your reward is not something more beautiful and profound that it could be. Praying the Roman road to make salvation, to me, always missed the clear call for salvation in John 3:17. The gospel to me isn't you're going to hell, it's Christ came to redeem his creation. Often you hear how could God let these things happen? Christ shows up and proves God won't. Yeah. That's interesting. I like that, Ray. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that. Yeah, I always found the Roman road concept just to be a weird one anyhow, right? Because Rome represented the oppressor, the nation that was stomping and crushing all these other nations and forcing them into an oppressive, enslaved, second-class citizen type situation. And then we've decided to call the road to safety for those in that oppressed situation the Romans road, which is, I don't know, it just seems wrong. Well, it is just wrong. I realize that they call it the Roman road because they pull most of those ideas, or they pull all of those ideas out of the book of Romans, and then they're playing on the idea of the Roman road. It's still terrible, and I don't think we should do it anymore. What do you guys think of my snow? Aren't you impressed with my technological prowess? All right. Any other questions? Anybody have any questions that they want to ask on charity, on holidays? Um, questions about Christmas, about Hanukkah, um, any of those things? I'd be happy to engage those. I asked because I had to give up free lunch Mondays because it seemed like too much of the focus was on how good of a dude I was. But it sucked because one, A, felt alive, and B, people loved it. Well, so Fifth Sunday, I would just say that if you aren't making the focus you, if what you're doing is putting the focus on, welcoming people into a space for a free lunch, and other people are uncomfortable because they've made it about you. Well, that's their problem, right? That's not your problem. That's their baggage. That's their stuff. Um, it's only if we're calling attention to what we're doing to celebrate ourselves that it becomes even potentially icky, right? But other people thinking it's about you, and you're not promoting it that way, that's not your problem. You probably have heard me say this before, and I'll say it 1,000 times, right? We are responsible to those around us. We are not responsible for those around us. Um, and that's one of the biggest things, one of the most important things I think that we can learn as people is how to behave in a healthy way of understanding who I'm responsible to and who I'm responsible for. The list of responsible for is extraordinarily short. Responsible for is yourself and a child or a person who needs you to make decisions on their behalf for their well-being, which would mean maybe someone in your care who has a mental disability, someone in your care who maybe is towards the end of their life, that type of thing. But beyond that, you're just responsible to other people. And so in a situation like what you're discussing here, if you are being responsible to them by creating a space in which people could come in, have a meal, have fun, enjoy it, not feel any kind of obligation, and somebody perceived it to be about you, then that's on them. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's what I would encourage you to be thinking about: responsible to, not responsible for. And let me tell you, I'll tell you a place where that is really, really significant, and we mess it up a lot, is in relationships, like with a partner. So whether it be a marriage or a significant other, that is the space where that responsible to versus responsible for is very, very important. Have you ever done a word study on charity and love? Not that specifically. I have done studies on both of those terms, not as a comparative. Charity is this idea of what is it called? Hold on, let me pull up a passage here. Oops, not Genesis, Matthew. So one of the things that's really interesting to me is that in Matthew 6, right, the passage we were just talking about standing on the street corner. In Matthew 6, let's see here. See if I can. All right. Let me scroll down through here. All right. So starting here in 25, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And you know how much more, and you not much more. Wow. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? So this is an important piece here. Let's see if I can find the other verse within here that I'm looking for. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to us as well. That's in verse 33. But I want to go back up here at verse 1. Let's see here. Be careful not to practice your righteousness, right, in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Whoops. I don't want to do any of this. Boy, oh boy. All right. So act of righteousness is kind of like slang for charity. So when someone does an act of righteousness, they are doing charity, which I love that as a concept, right? When you do the act of right behavior, you are being charitable. I love that that's kind of this picture. So in this section in Matthew 6, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others for them to see. So when you're doing charitable acts, you're not supposed to be doing them out in the open. And I want to be careful here, right? Because this gets to what Fifth Sunday was asking. It's not about other people not seeing you do those things. It's about attempting to be seen by them, right? So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, which is really just a shofar. So don't blow a shofar when you give to the needy, as the hypocrites do. Okay, so hypocrites here is not the term we use for it's the same word, but it's evolved now to mean someone who is faking or someone who lies, says one thing and does something different. That's a hypocrite. In this time, a hypocrite just meant an actor. So because an actor is pretending to be someone they aren't, right? So that's exactly how we get the term hypocrite. So don't behave like actors who stand on the street corners in order to be applauded, as actors would want to be, in order to be applauded by others. If you do, the applause is the only thing you'll receive. But instead, if we are to give acts of righteousness and do acts of righteousness, this is something that is very quiet, very private, that is done in order to honor the person that you're doing the act for, right? Because one thing I would say is a lot of times people get embarrassed. Like if you make a big deal that you gave money to someone or you gave someone food that was hungry, that can be embarrassing to the person that you cared for. And so you're supposed to be careful with that. So this idea of acts of righteousness is charity. And charity is the same thing as is later in Matthew 6. God is calling us to trust in God's acts of righteousness, right? Don't worry about your storehouse. Don't worry about where the things are going to come from, but trust the righteousness of God. Trust God's acts of righteousness. God will be charitable to us. So when we take a look outside our window and it is a beautiful day and we feel the sun on our skin, that's an act of righteousness from God. That's a charitable gift from God. When things are going well and beautiful, that is a charitable act from God. And I love thinking about it that way. It's not that something so significant happened. That would be a blessing. But the minute things, the little things that are what allow us to survive and go on in life, those are the acts of charity. Same thing when we do acts of charity for people around us. We're not giving them lottery winnings so their whole life is turned upside down and changed. That we're giving them charity. We're making sure that their next meal is had. It brings normalcy to a chaotic life, right? And so that's what Matthew 6 is talking about, both with us when we do acts of charity that brings normalcy. Well, that's just the right thing to do, to bring normalcy to other people's lives in the same way that God wants to bring normalcy to our life. So that is where what the idea of charity is. Um, it also kind of implies that by that idea of charity, it's not something that's really worth being patted on the back about. It's just doing, it's like, those memes, like you had one job, like that was you did your job. Your job was to try as best as you can to create space for normalcy for other people's lives in the same way that God does that for us. I really feel like I rambled quite a bit there, Amanda. I apologize. And then love, there's eros love, there's philo love, and then there's agape love. And all of those have different meanings. Eros is obviously more intimacy, sexual intimacy. Um, Phila is more, or Phila is more brotherly love, Philadelphia, right? And that's more of like that's more like friendship love, and agape is kind of like this sweet love in a community where it's like somewhere between um, philia and eros, where there's intimacy but it's not sexual, and there's a deep intimacy, which is why our family and many of our friends have practiced agape meals for years. Let's see. I was inviting people on Facebook like an advertisement. Again, I just think it depends on how you're doing it, Fifth Sunday. If you're going about by saying things like, "Hey, look, I'm awesome, and so I'm gonna buy you lunch. I'm gonna pay for your lunch, um, because I'm pretty awesome." Well, that might be a problem. But if you're just promoting something where you're saying, "Hey, come out to such and such place, where there's going to be a free lunch provided for you," and maybe not mention who it comes from, right? Um, so it's just a tough balance. I don't think that if I were you, Fifth Sunday, that I feel like you should probably carry too much weight about that with you. I agape you too, I think. Yeah, I do. All right. Any other questions? Amanda, thank you for that question. That's the problem when I try to do something off the top of my head that I haven't thought about in a while. But thank you for the question. Please, if you have further questions about it, throw it in the chat. And if you guys haven't already, I'd appreciate if you gave this a thumbs up, a like, because particularly while we're live, if you give this live stream a like, it tends to put it into the algorithm, and more people that are kind of putzing around on YouTube will get a notification that we're live. So if you don't mind doing that, I'd be grateful. All right. What other questions do we have tonight? What am I celebrating this week? Well, I'm going to Cleveland tomorrow to visit some dear friends of mine, and I am celebrating that. We are, as a family, celebrating our dog's life, our dog of 14 years. We are putting her down next week on Tuesday. It's going to be a hard day. Um, and but this week we are celebrating her. In fact, we celebrated her a little too much. We gave her a bellyache and some some stomach issues because we bought her so many treats to just kind of spoil her and give her everything she wants this week. So it might have backfired because I don't think her I don't think her stomach is doing so well with all the bad for her stuff that she's been consuming. All right. What about you, Amanda? What about the chat? What things are you guys celebrating this week? I'd love to hear. Throw it in the chat. Yes, we are celebrating her by stuffing her full of treats. Yes, Tana and my son went out and bought so many treats for that dog. She knows something's up. Let's just face it. Like, because she's like, this, like, you all are, I don't have to keep barking for a treat. You guys just offer me treats every time I turn around. So yeah. trying to think, what else am I celebrating this week? Um, yeah, I think yes, I am visiting. I am going out to see Amanda in Cleveland and her hubby, and I am looking forward to that. Are you still going away next weekend? Meeting up with Chris would be a celebration. I think that's up in the air at the moment. I'm not 100% certain, but there's a chance I might be going to Virginia next weekend, and if so, I would love to be able to catch up with some friends in Southern Virginia that I haven't seen in quite some time. But it is up in the air. I am speaking at a church on December 18th, which is a 100% virtual church. It's never had a physical location. I'm really excited to do that. Yes, and we have 500 subscribers. That's pretty amazing. That's been a great milestone to hit. Very blown away by all of that. It feels way too fast to have gotten to 500 subscribers. So we are grateful and humbled by that. All right. Are you guys going to make me spin the wheel again? Do you all like how I put that blame on you? I'm like, you all are going to make me have to spin the wheel. Look at that. 100% thumbs, right? At least according to my thing, we have 4 people watching and 4 thumbs. So we're doing pretty good. All right, folks. 540 subscribers now. That is correct. Yeah. So we're up to 540. Next big one is 750 and then 1,000. I'm really hopeful to hit 1,000 before the end of the year. No, before the end of next year. Hopefully by summer, by the end of summer, we'll hit 1,000. That would be tremendous. All right. Oh, wrong one. Let's do the spinner here. Yeah, we would love to hear suggestions. If you know people that would be interested in coming on, that would be interested in being a part of the live stream, we would love to have some guests. All right, let's see here. What is a Messiah? So Messiah is a complicated question. I feel this is good. I feel like the Spinners had some good questions. Spinner is outdoing you guys. Come on. A Messiah really just means anointed. So David is anointed, priesthood is anointed, the high priest is anointed. Like many people throughout Scripture are anointed in different situations, and Messiah just means, the anointed one. And so the anointed one, if you were anointed, then you were in some way participating in the plan of God, right? Participating in the unfolding of God's actions, behaviors, presence on this earth, and you were a part of that. So it became a part of Israel's imagination that there would become the anointed one being the Messiah, capital M, where this would be the person that would, or the individual, or the circumstances in which the final plans, the final ultimate plan of God would be opened up on earth. And so they began trying to understand, what does this look like? How does this come about? What are some things that we can see from the scriptures that could give us hints about this unfurling of the finality, or the finale, not finality, the finale of God's work within creation. And so it began this kind of watchful eye for the Messiah. And so Messiah really just became, to Israel, the one that was going to save Israel and save the world finally. Like, it's done. Everyone is safe. Everyone, all wrongs have been righted, right? Because if you think about it, if all wrongs are righted, you're safe. And so it became this thing where the end of the world, the end of time, that God would set all things right, and this would be ushered in by this anointed one, this one that had a unique place within the storyline of God. So, as you probably very well know, within Christianity, that individual or that Messiah is believed to be Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth. And Messiah is a uniquely Jewish concept because God or Yahweh is a uniquely Jewish God. And so you can't have a Messiah that's not thoroughly Jewish. It doesn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense. And so Jesus being a Jewish Messiah, which is one of the things that always intrigues me that modern Christianity has often dismissed, left off, does not acknowledge, doesn't celebrate the actual Jewishness of Jesus, which makes it kind of odd that we would have this un-Jewish esque figure who would be the Jewish Messiah. And also that the people that follow this Messiah would not have an affinity for that Messiah's religion. Instead, create a whole nother religion. So it's all very fascinating, very interesting. So Messiah really just means anointed one. The Messiah, capital M Messiah, means the one anointed one that is uniquely positioned to bring about the finale of God's movement towards setting all things right. I hope that was helpful. I really feel like I'm rambling a lot tonight, so I apologize for that. Rich Fan would be an amazing guest. He's not in the clergy or anything, but he's probably my smartest friend. Awesome. Well, I will say, maybe very well we could have Rich Fan on. We want to make sure we do is we're not just calling up somebody and being like, "Hey, do you want to be on this show?" But instead have a reason to have them on the show. So um, that would be the main thing I think when we're thinking about this is who would be a good person. So kind of like Kevin Nye, I think it's Kevin Nye, who wrote the book on homelessness I was talking about earlier. We would want him to come on to talk about his ideas and thoughts about a Christian response to homelessness. So if your friend Rich would be someone who would bring something to the table for a point of discussion, that would be wonderful. All right. Any other questions, or we can go back to the wheel? I shouldn't really complain too much about the wheel because I think we went like probably 6 or 7 episodes without me spinning the wheel at all. So it's bound um it's bound to happen, I suppose. Tana, a little insulted that you aren't the smartest friend of Fifth Sunday. I see. That's fair. All right, folks, going back to the spinner. My eyes are really dry today. Oof. Just want to take a nap. All right. Was Jesus a prophet? I am just fumbling around with this technology tonight. So the very first thing I think we need to do is have a conversation about what a prophet is, right? Because it's interesting to me because there are very few prophets in the scripture. Prophets are few and far between. And yet you would think by being in churches and hearing churchy people talk, you'd hear that prophets are a dime a dozen, that everyone's a prophet, and what it is, I've often found, is what people think is a prophet is someone who's an asshole. Someone's a jerk, they get called a prophet. If they say something that people don't like, well, then they're a prophet. And that may be true, but that's not the litmus test. The litmus test is, do they speak on behalf of God? Prophet does not necessarily mean someone who tells the future, that tells what's going to happen. In fact, very few prophets ever did. Prophets would often warn that if people continued down a certain path or continue to behave in a certain way, that it was going to be complicated. It was going to cause trouble. It was going to disrupt the things that God had in mind for the world, for Israel, and to be warned about those things. But I would say that the Bible insists that we are to be the priesthood to all nations. And so, as members of the faithful, our job is to be priests. We're not told we're to be prophets. And that's really significant. I knew someone once who was convinced she was a prophet because nobody likes my advice. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things, when people that are just rude, mean, or whatever, that that they can't see that maybe they're just rude and mean, and so they assume it must be that they are a prophet. A priest. So imagine, if you will, you have the people here, and then you have God here. Both a priest and a prophet stand here in the middle. A priest faces God on behalf of the people. Think about the high priest. The high priest would go into the Holy of Holies and wear the ephod, and on the ephod it would have all the different precious stones that represented Israel. And so they would go in and stand before God on behalf of the people, asking God for forgiveness, asking God for compassion, asking God for healing, for care, whatever it was. The priest would go in and stand before God on behalf of the people. A prophet would stand in that same spot between the people and God, except they would face the people. And they would tell the people what it was that God desired of them, and what it was that God wanted from them, expected of them, etc. And very, 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 very few people are called to be a prophet. But we are all called to be priests. And I think what's interesting is that Christendom has taken that call of being a priesthood and thought, oh, that means we're to preach at all these other people, because they completely misunderstand what a priest is in Israel. The priest wasn't the teacher in synagogue. That's not the priest. That's a teacher. That's a rabbi. The Bible doesn't say you're all to be teachers. The Bible says you're to be a priesthood. Our role as Christians is to stand before God on behalf of all people in this world and beg for God's mercy, compassion, forgiveness, for God's justice. And that is our role. And imagine, I always say this, I think it's so important. Imagine if that became your daily mindset, that every day you went through the day trying to find more and more people that you could stand before God on their behalf. That the person you meet on the street, that you stand before God on their behalf. The person you meet in the restaurant, you stand before God on their behalf. This is what intercessory means, right? When you are doing intercessory prayer, it means that you are behaving as a proxy for someone else. The high priest, wearing the ephod, would go into the Holy of Holies, representing all of Israel. And they were there as a proxy. This was intercessory. And so we are called to be about that. We are called to stand before God on behalf of all the nations, not preaching at them, but instead looking towards God and asking God for compassion, mercy, and justice for them. And I believe deeply, and I could be wrong, but I believe deeply that if I spent my life pleading for compassion, mercy, and justice for all the people around me, that I would become more merciful, compassionate, and just in the way that I treated them as well. And I think that is the key to this. I think that is the key to caring for our neighbor. That is the key for being a witness in the world. That is the key to being a priesthood. So, was Jesus a prophet? Yes, I believe Jesus was a prophet. Jesus was uniquely chosen to share things about what God desired from the faithful. And that was Jesus's job and role. But we also know, according to Hebrews, that he was the high priest, quote unquote high priest, right? Where Jesus was ultimately in the midst of all of this, the crucifixion, the resurrection, that the role of Jesus was to go and stand in the midst of the holy sanctuary in God's kingdom, in the heavenly place, and stand there on behalf of the people. And that we're called to carry that out also. When Miz was taking one of those spiritual gifts tests, he was given intercession, and he took that to heart. Yeah. Well, and I hope that when he took that, someone was kind enough to walk him through that and explain to him what intercession meant. Because we think it's just praying about or praying for other people. Intercessory is praying as someone else. It's putting on their person and standing before God when they can't stand before God on their own. And it's a beautiful thing. In fact, if I remember correctly, let's see here. Oops. I'll let you guys watch me fumble here. I think it's Genesis 24. Maybe 25. Yeah, it's probably gonna be 25. All right, let's see. Yeah, here, verse 21. It says, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. This, in the Hebrew, has a much heavier weight that fits intercessory, right? That Isaac prayed in place of Rebekah. And I don't really know how to articulate that well, because I don't think we talk about things this way. I don't think we think about things this way. When we used to run a food pantry, we would allow people to come as proxy for someone else and shop. So they would come in and they would shop through the food pantry as someone else. So that way they could get the food for a different family, and they could also get the food for themselves. And so they were both functioning as themselves as well as proxy for someone else. And in so doing, helped that other family. And so in this same passage here, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife. It wasn't he prayed for Rebekah, which this seems to kind of imply, but instead he prayed as Rebekah because she was childless. And knowing people who have had fertility issues or people who are childless who desire to have children, this is powerful because I would argue it has in here the sense that Isaac prayed to God because Rebekah just couldn't pray anymore about this. That she just was unable to stand before God any longer about this fertility issue. And Isaac was not willing to see that happen. And so Isaac would step in and do this prayer on her behalf. It's very powerful and beautiful. I wish it was something that we talked about more or we practiced more. And I think it would take a ton of practice because it's so outside of our kind of our ideas, our way of doing things, that I'm not sure. Um, I'm not sure we know how to do it. It's such an interesting difference. I don't think I ever knew that. I just thought it was praying for other people, praying for someone who doesn't want to be prayed for. I don't know that it's praying for someone who doesn't want to be prayed for. It's someone who can't pray. And I think it could be both, to be honest. Fifth Sunday. Um, when it comes to some of my own personal suffering and my own personal trauma, I'm all out of prayerful tears. I'm all out of prayers asking God to help me get through stuff. That trauma has been so hard for so many years. And I can't bring it up to God anymore. God knows. But the idea would be if someone else stood before God on my behalf and begged God for uh, that same kind of attention, that same, I don't really know how to explain it, but would just pray on my behalf. They would go before God as me because they know I couldn't do it. It's we do it all the time with other things. It's usually like doing someone a favor, right? Like someone needs to go to the grocery store, but they can't get there. And so we'll go to the grocery store and pick up the food they need. We went on their behalf. We went as their proxy. They were unable to get to the grocery store. And so we went in their stead. It's the same kind of concept. And it's really powerful and beautiful and meaningful. I keep trying to move this heart in the bottom right corner. I'm making a mess of things. Man, I was trying to move the heart. I was going to put it on top of the Christmas tree. I'm just going to be honest with you. This is why I can't have graphics on my screen because then I just want to play with them. All right. Any other questions? I can always go back to the. Oh, thank you, Amanda. I've always been curious about a contextual understanding of the verse that the prayers of a righteous man availeth much. Do you know what that verse is? Like what the actual reference is? James 5:16. Well, let's take a look. The prayer of faith. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. See that? Become anointed. And the prayer, oh, you're fine. I found it, Amanda. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. So here's one of the things that I think is significant and different about prayer in the way that James would have understood it, that Paul would have understood it, that the apostles would have understood it versus today. Prayer was action, right? Prayer was something you did. So the idea, so you're all familiar with the term paths of righteousness, right? So these ideas of paths of righteousness were that these sheep paths, because sheep would just travel in a straight line. So wherever the shepherd was standing, if the shepherd called to the sheep would just walk, and sheep would follow each other, nose to butt, and follow each other. And so on the hillsides, all throughout the Middle East, you would see these lines kind of grooved into the side of the hills. And those were called paths of righteousness because they were straight paths, and they were the paths that the sheep created on the way to listening to the voice of the shepherd. And so this becomes the imagery for a righteous person by the time of James. Is a righteous person is someone who walks a straight path towards the voice of God. And therefore, someone who prays, who is a righteous person, it's effective because they are always doing what is godly and good. And so there wouldn't be such thing I shouldn't say there wouldn't be, but it's far less likely in ancient times that people would say, my prayers and thoughts are with you. They just, that probably was not part of anyone's language. But if someone prayed for you, it would mean that they showed up at your home and they took care of you, right? Think about this even in that verse or in this section. Let me go back to it. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church. Oops. There you go. Is any one of you sick? This verse 14, let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith, right? Faith implies action. Faithfulness means the action. It's why we get so confused when Paul says faith in Jesus will bring you salvation. And I think I've discussed this before on here. That can just as easily, and I would argue more likely, or should more likely be translated as the faithfulness of Jesus. Jesus's faith is what brings you safety. Because when Jesus did something in good faith, that meant he was actively doing the ideals of God in the world. He was living out faith. He was leaving the corners of his field. He was taking care of the poor and the sojourner. He was looking out for the widows and the orphans. He was doing all these things, and his everyday behavior was perpetually doing care for others. And so someone who was sick, if the elders came and prayed in faith with them, then that meant they were probably bringing chicken noodle soup. And they were probably bringing comfortable things, and they were probably making sure chores were done around the house, and they were probably making sure that the kids were taken care of, and they were probably making sure that there's food on the table, and they were probably doing all those things. And then that person gets healthy because of their faith, right? Not because they asked God, please take care of this person, and then went home and went to bed. No, their faith is what brings about the well-being. And this is where I can get so mad, because the more we make our faith spiritual instead of physical, we feel like, oh, God's not answering our prayers. And in reality, we're supposed to be answering each other's prayers, right? When I am in need, it isn't God who is going to do a miracle to shift everything in the world to bring about my well-being. Though it will be the faithful around me who believe in doing the good and godly thing who will come to my rescue. And we have spent a great deal of time ruining that part of Christianity, where we've just told people, well, pray about it more. or just have more faith and it'll get no. No, actually the problem is the person that's saying have more faith needs more faith. Because if they had more faith, they would actually do what was necessary to care for the person in their midst. So it's super important, super valuable, super beautiful, and unfortunately feels like it's too little too late because so many people no longer find this faith to be active and therefore uninteresting. So, all right, any other questions or any follow-up on that, Amanda? I don't know if that was helpful or not. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions there. I apologize every time I switch screens that subscribe button pops up. It's starting to annoy me, so it probably is annoying you. Let's see. Man, I don't know if my eyes are red. Yeah, getting a little red. They are so dry right now. I'm not sure what's going on. Drink some water. All right, I'm going to go to the picker wheel. Of course, Amanda. I hope it was helpful. If it wasn't, please let me know. All right. Do we go immediately to heaven after death? This is another one of those, as I often say, we pull these from the internet, most popular questions asked or Googled. And this is probably coming from someone who just lost someone or is wrestling with their own mortality, which makes it more complicated, right, to have the conversation around stuff like this, because you just want to be careful and honor people, and not contribute to any unhealth that they're feeling. I don't know that we know. Do we immediately go to heaven after death? I don't know. I know that if what the Bible says is accurate, that ultimately we will be back on a renewed earth and not heaven bound. Whether it's a waiting room, I don't know. There's all kinds of theories that you die and it seems like a second and you wake up and it's the world to come and it's the end of time, and you wake up at, for you it feels like a second, but you wake up at the day of judgment. There are some people that believe that you instantly go to the presence of God. There's some that believe that there is no afterlife. I don't think any of us are certain. I think we all have experiences with either things that friends or family have told us, things that we have personally experienced. Look, I'm not a mystical person, but I'll tell you, when I was 12, after my grandfather committed suicide, I was at my grandparents' house and I was cleaning the basement because some water had gotten in within the day or two after his death. And I was down in the basement with a, oh man, what are those vacuums? Shop vac. And while I'm shop vacuuming the water, I all of a sudden feel this sense of I don't know how to explain it other than my grandfather's smile over my shoulder and the smell of his pipe tobacco, which is very possible just being in his basement because that's where his workbench was. So that could have just been present there. But I got a sense of his pipe tobacco and his smile over my shoulder. And right at that moment, the power shut off. And I'm in this pitch black basement. Boy, no one has ever seen me move so fast. I was up and out of that basement in like less than a second. I don't even think I don't think I touched a single step on the way out of that basement. Um, and my grandmother is upstairs, and she's like, "What's going on?" And I was just like, "Oh, the breaker went out." So we flipped the breaker, and I went back downstairs with great fear and trepidation. And the exact same thing happened again within a few moments. And, you know, whether that is emotions or whether that is real, to me, even to this day, it felt so real, that there was something comforting. There was something that either God or my grandfather or something was doing to comfort me. Uh, and then did a kind of a dick move by turning out the lights, if you ask me. But, uh, and so I don't know. I don't know what the reality is. Do we immediately go to heaven? I just know that if God is good and if God's desire is to see us uh, live an extended life beyond this one, it's going to be good either way. And I can't imagine it's going to be the delay between this life and the next is going to be anything that is so disruptive that it's harmful. I just don't imagine God wanting to cause trauma, major trauma, right before we head to the world to come. All right. I'd love to hear you talk about Revelation and Rapture sometime, but I know there's not time for that today. I'd be happy to do that. So Fifth Sunday, here's what I would honestly recommend. Write down a couple questions you have about it. And this Thursday, this coming Monday, I believe Dave is going to be on with me again. Feel free to ask it then, or you can ask it next Thursday. I can tell you, first and foremost, the rapture is not biblical. The rapture is something that was developed later. But the book of Revelation, I had the honor of going to Turkey to study with Ray Vanderlaan, and we spent the entire time discussing the 7 cities from the book of Revelation and the imagery in that and how that correlated to each of those cities. So there's a lot of really amazing stuff that I had learned over the years about that. So, all right. Any other questions? We're kind of at that tweener time that if we don't have any other questions, we could just wrap up a little early. But I'll give us a couple minutes, see if anybody has anything else they want to ask. I'd love for you guys to suggest a book to me that you'd like maybe you have read or you are reading that you would like for me to also read. I did miss Amanda. Thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out. But if you have a book or something you're reading and you want me to kind of glance at it, I'm a quick reader. I'd love to read something and have a conversation with you about a book you're reading. What about Jesus promising the thief that today you will be with me in paradise? Yeah, I mean, the truth is Jesus was then dead for 3 days in the tomb and hadn't gone to see God yet when he resurrected, right? He's talking to Mary Magdalene. She thinks he's a gardener. And he says he hasn't even been to his Father yet. So it seems to imply that Jesus didn't go that day to paradise. So the question then becomes, what would that mean, right? So great question. So if you think about what else is called paradise in the Bible, so the Garden of Eden was paradise. And what did it say in when they ate from the tree? If you eat from this tree, today you will surely die. They didn't die that day. In fact, they lived hundreds of years. And so I would argue that in this moment, when Jesus says to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise, is he was kind of undoing Eden. That on that very day that death was brought by the tree that they ate from, that on this day, the tree that Jesus and this thief hung from was going to be different. It was going to bring about paradise. It's going to bring about the Garden of Eden. And then you have Mary Magdalene see Jesus after the resurrection. She thinks he's a gardener. So I think this is all very much poetic language, which would have been very common for a Near Eastern book to be using that language of throwback, causing us to remember the garden, causing us to remember what happened in death there, that led to death there, but here's going to lead to paradise, or paradise renewed. So you posted a book above. I'm scrolling. I'm sorry, Amanda. I have not seen the book you posted above. Let me see if I can find it here. Amanda, I don't see the book you posted, but I'm sure someone else has seen it and will point it out to me, or you can tell me in person when I see you this weekend. So, all right. Well, I hope that was helpful, Amanda. Feel free if you have a follow-up question with that. Good. I'm not alone. I was like, man, my eyes are really dry. I'm not even seeing. Why couldn't Jesus be recognized by the two dudes after his resurrection? Because it would have ruined the story. You know, again, I would say that the point of Jesus on the road to Emmaus was not about so let's see. Let's pull it up. Oops. Helps if I take you with me. There we go. All right. On the road to Emmaus. Now, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. So, what I think is important here is it's the author doing good storytelling, right? Because here's what's really important. It says, as they approached the village, verse 28, as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. Now, Jesus does this often. He also does it when he's walking on the water and he acts like he's going to walk by them. And he does the same thing here. Like, Jesus does not want to be an imposition to people, whether it's getting in a boat or whether it's stopping at their house. It's kind of funny to me. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. Now, here's the important part. And this goes back to Amanda's question about paradise, right? When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. So Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Call back to the Garden of Eden. This tree's going to change things. Then Mary sees him and thinks he's the gardener. Again, Garden of Eden. And now, when Jesus eats with someone, their eyes are open, just like in the garden. And so all of these things are this building of this narrative that there's something happening with God's creation again. And the Garden of Eden is being redone or reimagined in some way. So you have the paradise on the cross, you have the thought he was a gardener, and here, when he breaks bread with them, their eyes are open. And when their eyes are open, they are no longer exiled from the garden when their eyes get opened, but instead they go back to Jerusalem to share the good news that Jesus is risen. So again, this is all language and important for us as we know the text, as we know the imagery, that we can start to see these beautiful pieces in there. I hope that helped your question. Why couldn't Jesus be recognized by the two dudes after his resurrection? Because it would have spoiled the end of the story where their eyes were open when he broke bread with them. That's my opinion. Bradley Zerzak, Out of the Embers. Let's see. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Out of the Embers. Faith after deconstruction. Yeah, I'll read that, Amanda. And maybe we can have some good conversations around it. All right, folks. Yeah, it's really cool. There's so many things there. This is why the Bible study that I'm leading in January, where I'll actually try and help people walk through how to start recognizing some of those hints in the text for Easter eggs, or maybe using Easter eggs to talk about the Bible is kind of funny, but those hidden imagery that we don't see because our minds aren't trained to that. Our minds don't think that way. And we miss a lot of really beautiful things. If the book is good, he might be a good guest. If the book is bad, he might be a better guest. All right. Well, the forward is by Brian Zond, and I think I know Brian Zond is a respected thinker in progressive circles, so I'm sure that I'm sure the book is well done. All right, friends, any last minute questions? If not, we'll call it a night. I got to get on the road relatively early in the morning to head to Cleveland. Yeah, got my Cavs. I know you're all shocked that I'm wearing a Cavs sweatshirt. I actually wasn't right up until about 5 minutes before the stream started. I was wearing a sweater, and I changed because, I didn't want to disappoint you all. So, all right, friends. Well, with that, I think I'm going to call it a night. I love you guys. I'm so grateful for you. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Wonderful questions as always. And honestly, the wheel did a pretty good job tonight too. Question: biblical literacy. ... I don't know. Yes, the answer to biblical literacy is yes. Do you actually have a question about biblical literacy? I'll take a moment. Starter tools to get to biblical literacy. Attend my class in January. I will get you the starter tools that you need. Honestly, I'm jesting somewhat, but really what I'm passionate about is showing people that most people have the ability to study the text already. It's just that they were never given permission to in a meaningful way. And I really hope that the study that I'm going to lead in January is going to help people embrace that they bring to the table so many of the tools already necessary for reading, understanding, and interpreting the Bible in solid, scholarly ways. But I will ponder those incomplete sentence questions uh, for Monday or for next Thursday, maybe, because Monday Dave will be on most likely. So, all right, friends, I love you. I hope you have a great night. I will talk to you all soon.